not just in the U.S., but internationally, and investing in our industry. So it's a real exciting time for us. I'm 34th year this year for me, so I've never seen so much energy. Kathy Petchel and Molly Petchel will be at Sequel in California on July 31st. If you're in California or the area, consider that great organization. They do a wonderful conference, and Kathy and Molly will be there. And finally, our annual business conference Shift will be held in Miami Beach this year. We have not launched registration. That will happen in September, but it will be February 18th through the 21st. We limit that to 300 guests. We really want you to make meaningful connections with people. It'll be all business and financial content. This is our third year. We've had great response. We have a blast doing it. We've got a fun theme this year and an awesome keynote that I'll announce in another month or two. So put that on your calendar. Love to have you there. It'll be a real special time. So registration in September. Look for that. So let's talk about the buying and selling process. Today we're going to look at the overview of all the steps that have to be done from the time, and I'm going to speak to this as if you were a seller, because that's my natural go-to. 95% of the people we work with are sellers. We do occasionally represent buyers, but you can apply the same concepts that I'm talking about if you're a buyer. A lot of our clients are choosing to grow and buy right now. It's the good news about growth right now is that economically we haven't been this strong in 50 years, I think. It's the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years. Parents are working, children are in school. If you have an enrollment issue, I suggest you reach out, and we do have a couple of consultants on the team that can help with operations and marketing concepts, because you should be pretty full right now. In this environment, unless you just have a huge everybody's got a market issue. I'm not even going to give you that as an out. I want you to be full right now. Now is the time to be full. It's the time to make some tweaks in your tuition rates and discounts. I did an article on that recently, so look for that on our website. Also meant to mention that the first 4 in this series, of this masterclass series, you can also access on our website, along with past years. So we do this as a service to our clients, so it's all free. Go back and get that content anytime that you like. So I will be speaking to this as if you were a seller, but again, you can apply this both ways. So just to look at the process at a glance, what to do just before you list, the pre-listing. How does the company get marketed to the world? How do people find out that you're available as an opportunity? And then this is the part where people get a little squirrely. So I want to talk about how you do that and maintain confidentiality. So that's critical for us. It's critical not just for the seller, it's critical for you as a buyer. The last thing you want to do is invest your money into a company and have it compromised in any way after closing. So if people learn of things that are happening before the appropriate time and not communicated in the appropriate way, they obviously get nervous. They don't know teachers don't know what's going to happen with their job. Parents don't know what's going to happen with the school. So we're fanatics about that. So I want to talk about the marketing process and how we maintain confidentiality. I want to talk about the LOI. I'm going to use some jargon, but I'm doing that intentionally. It's, not special stuff, but I like for you to hear it and connect with it and know what it is. Simply, it's simple stuff. We just use jargon to, make ourselves sound more smart. But the LOI is the letter of intent, which is a precursor to actual legal agreement. So we'll talk about that. I want to talk about how you transition the team. We'll talk about the diligence process, and this is what makes people crazy. So this is the part we will drill down to in tremendous detail next month. We will interview Carrie Ferguson, who I believe is the best in the industry at managing a diligence process, and she'll talk more specifically about that. We're going to talk about the legal documents, an APA, a PSA, or a lease. Again, jargon, I want you to know: asset purchase agreement, purchase and sale agreement. It also could possibly be an SPA, a stock purchase agreement, which is not typical in our industry. And then a lease if that is part of your process. We'll talk about the buyer and their licensing process, because that can be tricky. We'll talk about when and how to announce to your staff and parents that something is happening. And then we'll talk about the closing, which is always just, you're sitting at home because no one ever sits down at the closing table anymore. And a check goes in the bank and it's a little kind of, what just happened, because you worked so hard up until that point. But, celebration. So let's dig in. Okay, first of all, what happens in the very beginning? Again, I'm speaking as if you were a seller, but you could expect that if you were a buyer, these things would have already happened. So if you get an opportunity to purchase a business or real estate or both, someone should have already performed these functions. So for us, we perform a valuation of the business and the real estate for our clients. Real estate valuation can often, when there's a business in it, you guys who have been with me a long time hear me talk about this all the time. Real estate value can be drastically different if it's just an empty building, or if there's a business in it that it's dependent upon to generate the revenue to pay the rent or the mortgage. So real estate value with a business in it can often be much higher or much lower than the empty building's value, depending on the strength of the business. So we are often valuing a business and its real estate at the same time. If we were to sell a company for one of our clients, we would give them three values. We would give them the value of their business, the value they could expect in a long-term lease with a business owner, and the value they could expect in selling their real estate, because we like for them to have both of those options for their real estate. I'm a personal fan of owning real estate and leasing it to someone if they're very secure. So there's a risk trade-off there. Some people, and most people initially say to us, I'm out of here. Don't talk to me about keeping my real estate. And sometimes those people change their mind in a process. But, in today's market, where this used to not be the case, in today's market, either is very easy. So there's the valuation part. We don't charge our clients to do valuations. Some people do. It's a lot of work, so I understand that. In our methodology, it's our way to develop a relationship and be sure we're a good fit, because the last thing I want to do, we sell to a very specific market of larger organizations with cash who have the resources and experience and knowledge to transition your company very well. And everyone isn't a fit for those. So the last thing I want to do is charge somebody to perform a valuation and then say, can't help you. So it's a service that we provide for our clients. The next thing after we've done the valuation, we will tour and visit the school. And it seems weird that I'm saying it that way, but we cover the country and we are a 10-member team, so we don't often live in the same city. And in today's market, we can get really close to a very accurate value with what we know remotely and the information we gather. We try to keep it simple, what we know about the market, what we know about our buyers and what they're paying and what they want and what they don't want. We can predict that pretty easily, but we always have to visit and tour. Here's where confidentiality kicks in. So first of all, when we tour, we can do it similarly to how we would suggest that you allow potential buyers to tour. We want to be one of the following. If people feel comfortable, sometimes they just say, whoever on our team is an industry friend. The good news about that is that, sometimes people know who we are. It's rare, but it has happened before. Sometimes people will go ahead and set up a strategy that we recommend to let your team know one of a couple of things. Either I'm shopping my insurance relationship, I'm shopping my banking relationship, something like that. And over the next couple of months, I'll probably bring a couple of different groups through here that I'm considering. That way you sort of set yourself up for the future. We coach our buyers incredibly on what they do and don't do during a tour. They should be short. That person should ask minimal questions. But if you're a banker or an insurance agent, most questions are legit, they're logical. So if I were to ask a question about what was happening in a classroom, and I really tone down the verbiage that's industry specific, or if I asked a question about the building, that would be logical. But people want to tour during business hours. We want to tour during business hours as well. We know operations incredibly well. We want to get a sense of your staff, of your curriculum, of your day-to-day operations, how the center performs in the critical times of the day. So we're not disruptive, but that's when we want to be there, and that's when buyers want to be there. So if you are considering buying another business, that's when you want to be there. I strongly suggest that you don't let someone talk you into touring after hours. Another option would be a secret shop. Where our team is all really good at that. We either have children or grandchildren or made up ones. So again, we keep it simple. We keep the jargon down. We're there for 15 or 20 minutes. We're out of there. The good thing about this is it also gives you a sense of how the team sells the school. So you can get a sense of, they're really great, or this is an opportunity for me to coach them to do a little bit better and increase enrollment. So that's always an opportunity. And when you buy, I always want you to have some upside. I don't like for people to buy at the very height of that business and pay absolute top dollar for the market. I want you to know that there's some tweaks you can do to improve the financial picture. That's always where you want to be. Okay, so at this time also we ask for diligence information. It's a very short 12-item things you should have sitting on your desk: financial statements or tax returns, tuition rates, license capacity, some basic questions about how your business operates. And again, we can get almost 100% to an accurate valuation that way. Once we're all happy and all that has happened, we feel like we can meet a seller's selling objectives. The seller feels comfortable with us because it's a relationship. You need to be very careful about the person you trust with this. It's not just your asset, it is your life's work. And that person needs to be thoughtful. They need to be well connected. They need to communicate well. They need to explain to you how they're running a process, how they're maintaining confidentiality, who they will be showing your company to, and talk to you anytime you need that. So it's really important. And I suggest to people all the time, talk to several people. I'm confident that if we're the right fit, you'll be back. And if we're not, I will wish you well. But talk to people until you feel comfortable. So all of that should happen up to the point of executing a listing agreement. Okay, so now I would like to say a couple more things about the listing agreement. Let me go back just a little bit. Here's some key things I want you to look for. We write our listing agreements so that you can terminate it at any time if you're not comfortable. The last thing I want you to do is be stuck with me if you feel like I'm not doing a good job. That has never happened to us. And the day that it does, I'm grabbing the team and we're figuring out what we're doing wrong. But look for, be wary of listing agreements that tie you up for years. Be wary of listing agreements that have a tail that's very long. And by a tail, I mean that some agreements will require that you pay that person for X years if you sell your company, whether they brought you that person or not. Almost every agreement will have, let's say it will be, if I introduce you to someone and within a year, you sell it to that person, I get protected. But for me to expect that you will pay me if someone else buys your company or 5 years later is crazy. So look for some things like the term, can you get out of it? What obligations do you have after the termination of the listing agreement? So those are really important things to take note of. Okay, now we're ready to market. We are going to present information to potential buyers. So here at Hinge, we do not publicly market anything. And there are some companies that need to be marketed to the public because they're a better fit for a local provider or an individual that maybe has been in the business or maybe has not. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. At Hinge, we have the luxury of not marketing publicly, drastically reducing the possibility that there's a confidentiality breach. So what we do with our clients is we provide them a list of potential buyers. We might rank them. I want there to be at least a couple that I feel strongly about. I love it if they're 7 to 8. To be honest, we don't want 10. We have had. We've done big processes where we've had 100. But if it's a smaller company, we want to give those buyers very close attention. We want to manage it closely. And most of the time, we know who the top 4 or 5 are going to be based on the following criteria. To me, number 1, how do they run a process? Is it going to kill you and take you a year? And perhaps they will ask you to reduce your price in the process. There's some of that out in the world, and we choose not to work with those people. So I want you to know. And we still work with some that are good in every other way, and they're a little challenging, but we tell people that up front. So how do they run a process? How do they treat your people? Because I want to call you 30 days after the closing and 6 months after the closing and a year after the closing, and I want you to say, I believe things are going well. That person took care of my people, and everyone, will never be the same, but they're happy, because that's all that matters in a transition. And if you screw that one up, you're going to lose everything you just paid for. So your mantra is, hey, we want you. We're impressed with you. We think we can learn from you. Whatever you did on Friday on the day of closing, you do again on Monday. Nothing drastic is going to change in the short run. We've got some ideas we think are cool. We want to tell you about later. We'll figure it out together. Thank you for being here. So that's what should happen in a transition. So people issues and how they transition them. And honestly, if they don't do a good job with that, we don't put them on our buyer list. The third one to me is price. And I have to say that in my 34 years, I have never once had a seller say to me, don't care who it is, don't care what they do, they can shut it down, they can go away, get me the most money. That has never happened to me. But those are not diverse things anyway. So often the best operators are the best payers, and that's why they're so good. They pay well, they take care of people well, their pricing is great. So we want you to know who all of those people are that we're talking to. You should always know that. Always shocks me when I talk to someone who's been through a process and they have no idea who their broker has talked to. We will talk about the pros and cons of each one. And we'll have that seller tell us. Very often a seller will say, I know them, they're in my market. I'm not sure my staff or families would react well to them. Let's push them down. We can have a first tier list and a second tier list, or maybe they say, no, I'm not. This happens sometimes too. I'm not selling to them under any condition. So it happens. But you should know who those people are talking to. What we are doing is calling directly to the decision maker who we've worked with before. They know us. They trust us when we say, hey, got something that is perfect for you, or I have something that looks like this, but maybe this little thing wouldn't be perfect for you, but I think you should consider it anyway. So they trust our judgment on what things would meet their objectives. At that point, at this point, the buyer still should not know who you are until they sign a confidentiality agreement. Confidentiality agreements are referred to as NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. Basically says, I'm going to know about your company, you'll know things about mine. We will not share those in the world. And we are, again, fanatical that we have those legal agreements in place before a potential buyer gets information. And we rarely have a breach. I mean, we almost never have a confidentiality breach. I'll tell you where it usually comes from if we do, but it's 1 in 100. I don't know what the number is, but it's so rare I can't remember the last one. At that point, we are going to ask our sellers for information to produce a marketing piece about the company called an OM, or offering memorandum. It's a beautiful web-based marketing piece that we create with photos and charts and information about operations and staffing and financial and future for this company. And so we work, we have a creative team in-house that puts these together. We give potential buyers, after they have signed an NDA, access to it online so we can track access and we know who is looking at what. But it's very secure. We manage that very closely. So that's the first part of the marketing process. The next thing that happens is someone's going to be interested in your company and they're going to want to come tour. So I talked about most of this when I talked about the broker tour because we manage them very similarly. When a tour happens, we come on site. I don't care if your company's in Hawaii and I'm in New York. I'm going to be there every time. I will never come in your building but once because people are smart, right? They will know me right away. But what we do is introduce the buyer and seller off-site, give them a chance to ask each other questions. We let them go off and do the tour, and then we meet back with them again. It's usually just a very friendly visit. We're not talking deal dynamics. We're not getting asked specific questions. It's actually a lot of fun because this is the chance for the seller to show off their company. And honestly, the buyers are trying to sell themselves to you at that point in this market. Pick me, and here's why. So it's kind of fun. We enjoy that. So as I said before, most buyers prefer to tour during working hours. As a matter of fact, all of them do. If they really, really wanted something and a seller insisted, they might consider it, but I think you should just be prepared to run a correct process, and it can be done easily if handled well. As I said, we meet off-site. They can tour as a friend, insurance banker. Confidentiality is critical, and again, we coach our buyers, but they're very good, and they do this all the time. If we have a changeover in people, we coach them very closely on what they're doing there, what they're not doing there, what they're saying and not saying. And then we encourage them to ask any important questions off-site. So the first, they will want to tour and touch your school before making you an offer. Confidentiality, I think we talked, I have been interjecting that as we go. Again, we have a very specific one-line slide here because this is critical. And handling a process properly ensures that everyone transitions well. There are no breaches. I will go ahead and tell you guys that in the past, if we had a breach, it often came through licensing notification. So we're working really hard to be sure that doesn't happen, and that's happening successfully. So sometimes when licensing gets involved and a license has to be gained before closing, there are a few states that will allow the buyer to license after closing. I don't really prefer that, I'll be honest, but especially if you're the buyer, I want you to know you have a valid license before you close. I want you to know that the building meets standards and that there's nothing you don't know before closing. So we typically have the buyer license before closing. We coach licensing every time we talk to them. Just remember that I'm the only person you can talk to. The staff does not know. The community does not know. This is highly confidential. And most of the time we'll get the seller involved in that because they would have a great relationship with licensing already, and they can connect the buyer and help walk through the process. So again, can't speak enough about the value and importance of confidentiality. Okay, now that we have people interested, and it's really rare that any of our buyers have gotten to that point and don't submit an offer. They typically know before they even come. Like, they're not going to fly from Oregon to North Dakota or Texas if they don't already know that they really like your school. And with web-based information about schools and the information we've already provided, they typically know that they're ready to make an offer. So it would be rare for someone to get to that point and not submit an offer. We love it when we have multiple offers. If you just get one, often you're not really sure if that was market value. We're pretty aggressive on pricing right now. At times we don't even name pricing just to see what the market will bear. And that's it. Not naming a price or overpricing is not a deterrent at all to getting this very aggressive market to look. It's going to be what it's going to be. And if it's $1 million more than they think they can pay, that will not keep them from looking and making an offer. So that's not a risk. So at this point, they would submit a letter of intent, commonly referred to as an LOI, that is an expression of interest in your company. So an LOI is non-binding. Once you sign it, you are not obligated to sell your company to them. That just jumpstarts the process. And obviously, the main thing people are trying to get to here is price. But we're pretty careful about there are 9 or 10 other major points that we pretty much want to know we're clear on before we get to definitive legal agreements. So we just come up with our own methodology to be sure that not just price, but there are 9 or 10 other things we don't want you to be surprised about when you get a definitive offer. And they're important enough to outline. So once you've chosen one and we negotiate, you sign the letter of intent. That jump starts the process. So a lot of people at this point think, whoa, yeah, I'm done. I've sold this company. We're great. I've got this offer. We've agreed to it. It's going to take a couple of months to go through diligence and licensing. All good. Relax. So this is the part that really trips people up because it was emotional to get to this point, right? First of all, it was emotional to decide that you wanted to even think about doing this. Now you've chosen a broker. You've trusted them with your baby. Your information's out in the world, a little nerve-wracking. Now we've gotten an offer, we've accepted it, we can relax. We still have a lot of work to do to get to the closing. And the last thing we want people to do, if I had to say the most common mistake, is take their eye off the ball of operating their company and compromise revenue or EBITDA or any part of their company. And the distraction of getting to this point can often do that. It's time consuming. You'll almost feel like you have 2 jobs at some point. So we try to do it as quickly as possible. But it's time consuming and distracting. We have to keep focused on, number one, operating the company as if you will operate it forever. You don't know what's going to happen. You want to continue to make those good decisions, continue investing as you would had you not been at this point. And really keep your focus on operating your company. So that's important. Okay, one of the first things we want to do as we're kicking off this next thing, where several things happen simultaneously. Now we're starting to talk about how we're going to work through the process. The attorneys are drafting legal documents. We have a diligence list that we work through. So here's where Carrie Bergerson comes in. Our diligence requests from buyers can be anywhere from 1 to 14 pages of stuff. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what those buckets look like, and then Carrie will deep dive into that next month. And so all of those things are happening at the same time. But one of the first things we want to do is just introduce everybody. So we call it our kickoff call. We have key people that will be working together on both sides of the transactions. We have the broker team from Hinge. We have Carrie, and we talk about let's explain the company. Let's tell, be sure everybody knows what we're doing and who the players are. We talk about tuition rates and are you going up during this process and why? What are your employee wages? How stable is your team? What's your curriculum? Are they going to change the brand? What's going to happen in the future? And give you the opportunity as a seller to ask any questions about how they will behave during the process and what their expectations are for changing or not changing the business afterwards. So we always want to be sure we start on the right foot that way. Okay, I'm just really going to name these buckets of diligence that a seller has to go through. Like I said, it can be a very simple one-pager. It can be very extensive. We have draft or sample diligence lists. So a lot of times we'll have a seller's, even before or during the listing phase, say to us, please show me what this is going to look like because I feel like I need to get started, or at least I need to have it in my head so we can go ahead really early on and let them know what they could expect. But typically, there is information required to transition a company related to the corporation or the entity itself. So legal documents about the formation of the company and the ability to transition it. There's always information about the facility. There will be a facility inspection. You will want to be sure that things are in good shape and that we suggest not to make major investments in your facility at this point, but it does need to look good. It certainly needs to be clean and uncluttered. Paint and landscaping go a long way at this point. The financial data is often the most extensive, but also, the simplest. It's tax returns, it's pay rates, it's information about your tuition rates, it's deposits, so Carrie will talk more about that next month. I don't want to give away all the information. The buyer will have to collect information about employees, and that's mainly to transition them from a payroll and benefits standpoint. They'll want to know how operations works, who are major vendors, who they purchase from, how those things work. They want to know key information about how the company has marketed itself. Do they have a CRM program? Do they have a website? What things have they done in the past that might be transitioned? They'll want to know about the technology that the company uses. They'll want to know, there's always a lot of legal aspects. Do you have any pending lawsuits? Do you have any claims against the company? If there's real estate involved, then there's work with the real estate and the zoning and the environmentals and the surveys. And so we're getting through that process together. Carrie sets up a system where our sellers can upload documents. Carrie organizes and checks them. We give the buyer access to it, so we manage that pretty closely. If this sounds like a lot, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is. And if you are the buyer, you want all this stuff to protect you. You want to know as much as you can about the company that you're transitioning. You don't want surprises after you've paid for it, and neither do other buyers. Okay, so the legal agreements look like this. The APA and PSA are words, and SPA all relate to, well, let me back up. An APA and an SPA are an asset purchase agreement or a stock purchase agreement. Those relate to the business. And the reason you don't see SPA here is that it rarely happens in our industry and in most industries. So there are two ways to buy a business. You can buy its assets or you can buy its stock. So if you think about it this way, if you buy its stock, you bought the entity, you bought all of its assets, all of its obligations, and all of its history. So that doesn't generally happen in our industry because you're then liable for everything that happened in the past if an employee or a family were to come up a year from now and say, 10 years ago, so-and-so happened in your school, you have to address that. You're now liable for that. So that doesn't happen often. What typically happens is that the buyer will buy the assets of the company. The assets include equipment, furniture and fixtures, vehicles, and goodwill. And this is what trips people up, because a lot of people, because business value is based on cash flow and the amount of cash that that business generates. If you want to know more about that, we've done a complete series on valuation. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, but they're on our website. But what you're buying related to the cash that it generates is goodwill. So the company has developed the goodwill of the community. They have good standing. They have a revenue stream because of that, and that's where the majority of the value is. So that all gets outlined in the asset purchase agreement. Then you're going to receive either a purchase and sale agreement for your real estate or a lease for your real estate, depending on whether you choose to sell it or you're going to lease it going forward. All of these agreements are lengthy. There are certain elements that we fight to include in those. There are certain things we don't want to be surprised about. So to walk through these is very complicated and really outside the scope of this, definitely this masterclass and probably any. But you want to have professionals on your side, a broker team that knows the industry and a transaction attorney who work together to be sure you're protected in these legal agreements. You don't want surprises later. You want to be sure that these agreements are well written. In our world, we typically start with the buyer documents because they're usually repeat buyers. They have documents to start with, so that minimizes the cost on our sellers, and then we work to be sure that they say the right things. So legal documents are happening at the same time that we're going through diligence. We're developing the legal documents. And when diligence is waived and legal documents are agreed to, we can talk about licensing. Like I said, you have to know your state. It's all over the place. We always go for what licensing says is required as a notice period. Some say you can call me the day after you close. Typically, they'll require a 30-day notice period. There's some states that require 60. And often you can get it done faster. But if they say 30, you need to plan for 30 because they aren't promising you it will be less than 30. This is the time that confidentiality is critical. As I said, we like for our sellers to get involved because they have the relationship. But really, the buyer is the only one who can obtain the license at this point. This is a brand new license. So if you were to ever do a stock purchase agreement, licensing is not required. You're purchasing the entity that already has a license. But like I said, rarely happens, and we don't suggest it to you as a buyer because of liability issues. We want you to buy the assets, and then you have to relicense. Pain, I know, but in the long run, protects you much better. So know your licensing process. I'm sure you do. Ask questions about if you're acquiring or going into a new state, especially where you don't know their licensing system. Ask questions about what's required. We find, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but we have sold 2 schools in the same county and gotten 2 completely different answers on what needed to happen to do the process of a sale. So remember that your licensing folks don't do this every day. They often don't really know what's required, and this will shock you, but sometimes they just make things up. So maybe you'll have to challenge them a bit on what they say, but start the conversation and be well prepared for that process. We want to, now we have diligence waived, and by waived, I mean everybody's happy with it. There are no other issues that are going to come up. We have the legal agreements in place, and we know we're good with the license. So when do you tell your team? This often makes our sellers really, really nervous. I'll give you some personal opinion, and then I'll give you some practical practice and what's actually happening in the industry. For me personally, because I have transitioned a little over 500 schools in my career, and I've done it a lot of different ways. And although one of our buyers waits till after closing to tell the team, and it seems to work fine because they're really good at it, it's not my favorite. And I know it makes people nervous, especially as a seller, if I say I really want you to let them announce 7 to 10 days before closing, but we already have everything in place. And the reason I say that is I find that people transition much better if they're involved in the process. You respected them enough to tell them what was going on. You gave them a chance to ask questions, but you didn't give them 6 months to worry about it. So it's a short amount of time. We typically do the staff announcement at the end of a business day. It's a joint announcement between the seller and the buyer. The seller will be very brief. They will thank their staff. They will compliment their staff. They will say, we got here together and now it's time for you to fly without me. This is the company I've chosen. Here's why I chose them. I believe in them. I think they can give you new opportunities. So they will miss you. It will never be the same. But what we try to fall back on is 2 things, hopefully. One is that for us, is typically the buyer is a larger organization and they have the opportunity for advancement. Typically, if it's a larger organization, they also have better benefits. Not to say that any of those things were bad with you. It's just things we try to focus on. Whatever you can find to say, I'm excited for you guys to have the opportunity for A, B, and C. These guys have a lot of ideas, and I'm happy with how they interact with people. And then you're out of there in 10 or 15 minutes. I actually suggest that the seller leave, but they're at the very least in the back of the room saying nothing. And the buyer will go through introductions. They will talk about themselves as a company, their history, their mission, their operations, their curriculum. They will assure people that they, want this company because they want them, that they will be offered jobs. And our buyers always keep the team. And they, the last thing you want to do is replace the team. And you shouldn't lose any of the team unless you choose to lose some of the team, because I would suggest only for issue with their job performance. But that typically goes really well. So you have this very engaging, warm interaction, introduction from the seller. And again, don't expect this to be Disneyland. They, if they're close, and they usually are with the seller, they'll be sad about the transition. Give them something to hold on to. Ask them to work through the process and give it a chance, and they will. And if the buyer's great, and again, we believe all of ours are, we wouldn't be bringing them for your consideration, they will do the same. Now that the staff know, when do you tell the families? Well, first of all, they've already known because they've been texted by the staff during the meeting, right? But here's what I found in my experience. Some buyers hold parent meetings. Most do not. And here's the reason. They will the next morning put out information to parents. We now have some of our sellers doing cool videos to thank their team, to thank the community, to introduce, not in person, but talk about why they chose their successor, give them a little positive energy. That goes out on social media. It might as well, because everybody knows anyway. And so our experience, though, is that the family will generally look to the person who cares for their child and say, is this okay? And if that person who should have really been spoken to and sold the night before says, I think this is going to be fine, let's give it a shot, then they will generally be fine. We do have a few clients that hold parent meetings, but generally it's not necessary. And it is just the easiest part of the transition. Maybe that sounds strange, but that's actually what happens. So again, in my perfect world, I want this to happen 7 to 10 days before closing. I will tell you that some of our larger corporate buyers who are excellent buyers, treat people well, and pay very well, want a 30-day notice period. I find that, in my opinion, is a little bit too long, but they're not going to compromise on that. So that would be one of the things we would tell you very early on. Let us tell you how you will like working with this group as a buyer. You need to know that you're going to need to announce 30 days ahead of time. Again, at that point, licensing's done, diligence is waived, legal agreements are in place. Again, in my opinion, it delays the closing 30 more days. But it's not, if you get the other things right, it can be done. Personal preference. Okay, then, you know, we, like I said, a closing is not something people show up for and sit down and sign papers like we used to in a big old stack like this. It happens electronically days ahead of time for us. Most of the time, buyers and sellers are in different parts of the world or the country, and they sign documents days ahead of time. They happen electronically, and money's wired into your account on the day of closing. We track our sellers for years, actually, to be sure that all the pieces of the agreement happen, because some of them actually happen after the closing, and those are complicated and outside the scope of this. But we track our sellers emotionally and financially. We want to be sure that they got the things they needed in the process, and that's not the end of the world. Maybe they want to get back in this thing at some point. I know that sounds funny, doesn't it? Okay, so next masterclass is Thursday, August 15th. Again, we are going to pick Carrie Pergerson's brain and have her talk to us all about the very exciting diligence process. And I think you'll find it interesting and love what she has to say there. So let's jump into, I think we have about 6 minutes. Try to be very respectful of your lunchtime. Let me get up here to questions. There we go. Okay. Question on tax strategies. One of the things I should have said is I should have expanded on negotiate. Excuse me. When we get offers for our clients, a lot of times you think that a negotiation, if you've sold a house, you know, typically the negotiation is, I'll pay you this, no, I want that. Maybe you have some other things about, well, I want a credit on this, or I want you to fix that. But generally, it's a price issue. For us, when it gets down to negotiation, that's when the creativity and the fun begins. Because it is often much more about price and ways to make it more valuable for our sellers in other ways. So tax strategies is one of those things. So I guess the top ones would be, first of all, the allocation of assets. So you guys heard me mention that if you're selling or buying a company, you will need to allocate the purchase price between assets. So let's assume you're selling your business and your real estate. You're going to have an allocation for equipment, furniture and fixtures. Sometimes playground equipment will be separate. Vehicles, if you have them, will be separate. And real estate will be separate. And goodwill, sorry. So certain of those 6 categories are more tax advantaged than others. So when we get ready to negotiate, we will often negotiate prices between buckets so that, sorry, another question came in. So we will allocate between those buckets to get the best tax advantage. So that's one way. Another way is to consider, and we're never going to not pay taxes, right? We're just going to put them off, but we love to put them off. So another thing that you heard me say is to think about leasing your real estate so you don't immediately pay the taxes on your real estate. Again, you want to know that tenant's very secure. I would never suggest this with you selling to a person who didn't have experience and was entering the industry for the first time. But if you've got a larger company that's very secure, I'm a real estate owner in the industry myself. I never want you to get your building back and have to figure out what to do with it. But we secure very specific long-term leases with certain parameters for our sellers. And that's a great tax strategy. Another one would be, these are just my top three, there are many, would be to swap your real estate into another investment real estate. This is called a 1031 exchange. 1031 refers to the tax code. It's very complicated to do, but completely worth it. So get yourself an attorney that is familiar and has dealt with 1031 exchanges and have them manage that for you. So those are my top three tax strategies. I love this question. Do we keep the old director? So this is one of my favorite questions. So perfect world. So here's the perfect world. You're going to buy a business and the owner has worked their way out of a job, like you heard me say earlier. So this is one of our pre-counseling for you guys, that it's just like raising children, right? Your main job is to help them learn how to function without you. That's it. I mean, you can have fun with them and love them and all that, but you need to teach them how to do that so they can function. Same thing with your team. You will attract a higher quality team and keep them energized as long as you keep providing opportunity and bringing them up. So in a perfect world, the owner, and you're never going to not pay attention to it. You need to know what it's doing financially. You need to know key pieces of information, and you need to know big decisions. And we outlined that for you last month. But first of all, you don't want the team or the parents to be concerned when you buy a school that the management is not secure. So in a perfect world, the company that you're buying has a director that people love and has a relationship with. It has a team of teachers that families are happy with. And you can walk in the door, maybe you have to change some financial systems. I don't know. You have to move those people to your payroll. But in a perfect world, nothing else happens for a while. You earn their trust. Maybe you integrate some new fun curriculum. Always just a little tip as well, even if they have everything they need in the building, send a box of stuff the first week. Manipulatives, books, I don't know what it is. Just send them something. And teams love that. So it gets more tricky though if you are purchasing a business that's troubled. So it's also a good growth strategy though. So there's a difference between I'm paying market value for a company. Don't pay market value unless it's well equipped, everything's in great shape, it's well enrolled, the team is perfect, and you just step in the door, you paid the money, you're confident that you can continue to earn that revenue and then make even more from it. If it's a turnaround for any reason, the director, if the enrollment's low, you have the wrong director. I'm just going to say that one more time. If enrollment's low, you have the wrong director. I can't tell you how many times people have called me and said, I need you to come here and tell me why I can't get enrollment. Save your money. I don't need to know who it is. You've got the wrong leadership. The end. So I know how I sound when I say that, but I promise you, you need to change leadership. So if enrollment's an issue, change the leadership. Maybe you bring someone new in, but you don't completely lose that person. Maybe they're happy to go to an assistant director position. Maybe they just want to cook. Maybe they're happy to be a teacher. In severe cases, maybe you do need to terminate that person. If it's really, really bad, don't even transition with them. Make the change day one and do it, and rip the Band-Aid off and do it. Because often if that person's poisoned for some reason, bad attitude, maybe not doing their job, they're going to be in your building poisoning the operation. So again, perfect world, market price, everyone should be intact in transition. Don't lose a soul. Trouble school, getting it for a good price, enrollment slow, there's some going on, you're not completely happy with the operations, you probably need to change some people. Don't keep fighting and expecting a different answer with the same team, because it's all about the team. This will be nothing else. I went over, and I apologize. We have more questions, and we will answer your questions. We will either send those out with answers following. You will get a survey immediately following the masterclass, and please answer that and give us some great ideas about the future of the rest of this series. We have some ideas, but we would like yours as well, of what would be most useful to you. And thank you for joining us, and we will look forward to seeing you on August 15th, where we take this deep dive into diligence. Thanks so much, guys. Enjoy the rest of your week.